So I'm just going to talk to you a bit about how... Oh, testing? Yep, okay, cool. Just going to talk a little bit today about the Heap tool that I've written and how it sort of works and the reasons why I've developed something like this. So as some of you already know who I am, I'm Steve, or Mr. Me. Yeah, so I do exploit dev. I do some reverse engineering, and we write in Python, not Ruby. So just how we roll. So I work for Immunity, so we build exploits and we sell them. So if you have a problem with that, then I'd suggest you leave. I'm not going to drop any 0 days in this presentation or anything like that. Unfortunately or fortunately, some knowledge is kind of assumed in this presentation, but I'll try and, I'll hold your hand as much as I can. So we're going to cover, what is Heap, right? Like why develop a tool like that? What is, what are the motivations? We're going to cover what some metadata attacks are and what are covered actually in the tool and what aren't, and the reasons behind it. We'll talk about functional design, installation, and how to use it. And then we'll give a demo. I'll give a demo on a live Heap overflow and the analysis of that, and then an exploit for that. We'll look at the limitations and what can be done in the future. So first, a little bit of a lesson. Okay. Why a chameleon, right? What is a chameleon? Well, it's small, changing, it's old world. It's it rotates eyes and does all sorts of crazy stuff, right? So this essentially is very similar to how problems with the Heap. When they eat bugs, It's just how it works, right? It's the diet. So it's essentially a chameleon is slow moving. So Heap evolution or design, functional design, it's been pretty slow over the years, especially in the newer platforms. From analyzing Heap bugs, you're gonna get protruding eyes, right? You're gonna go crazy looking at some of this stuff. I've spent hours and hours just to realize that I fail and suck. So at Heap stuff. So you'll waste a lot of hours doing this stuff. So I don't recommend it. It has the ability to change a lot. So the state of a Heap, for example, has the ability to change so rapidly, so quickly, and you won't even see it coming. So for example, this chunk's in this block over here, and all of a sudden it's free or whatever, and you're like, what the hell? How that it shouldn't have happened already or whatever. So it's changing state so rapidly that it's impacting the types of bugs we're trying to exploit. So and obviously they kill bugs, right? So you'll give up, you'll try and analyze a Heap overflow, and you'll probably look at it and you bash your head for weeks and months or whatever, and then you'll be like, shit, I just give up and I'll just drop the bug online or whatever, and hopefully someone out there can exploit it, right? Hopefully there's some people that know what they're doing. So what actually is Heap, right? It's basically a plugin for Immunity Debugger. It's offensive focused, so it's we use it to analyze a bug and then look at ways in which we can exploit it straight away. So it will try and do some sort of runtime detection, and when detecting Heap overflow, and go, all right, well, what's overwritten in the chunk? Is this part of the header overwritten, or is this part of the chunk overwritten? Is application data attacked, or anything like that? So we dynamically at runtime look at what is attacked, what's not, and hopefully in the future, what I'm sort of looking at is ways in which what sort of data is around that chunk that's been overwritten that we might be able to target, instead. We try to visualize also the Heap structures to make it a bit easier for people analyzing it, because I understand that the little green men are a bit hard to understand, to see in the debugger. So and I had some motivators along to help me along the way. So it's good to see that as I was learning this, I can put it to something, I can apply it to a tool that should be useful in the future. So a few guys have helped me, motivate me, and so yeah. So these are the attack techniques that are covered. So you've got all the old school sort of ones that are mostly covered at the moment. Some of the new school stuff is still being applied to. So I just pretty much covered the most effective type of techniques that sort of I've seen and that I could sort of picture or use in the real world in different types of attacks. So some of them, critical section unlinking and things like that, it's such a rare and corner case that it's almost unlikely to happen, right? It's still there, it's still possible eventually, but you know, it's such a corner case that it's very rare. So, and especially stuff that's been used already in exploits, you know, stuff like bitmap flipping or you know, free entry offset overwrites and things like that. So, yeah. So this is the kind of design I've done. So basically, you know, it's very object oriented. It's got chunk validation, full unlinked validations, and on both the front end and the back end allocators on different heap managers. So yeah, for example, you've got a full unlinked macro validation there in XP on the back end allocator. Yeah, so it even does obviously validates the front end F-link as well on XP. So if the F-link is overwritten on the front end allocator, then it will validate that and tell you at runtime it's overwritten, and you know, you might be able to use that for an attack. So so you know, this is essentially how it's working. So we know that a chunk is at a certain offset from a heap bin, for example, and that heap bin is an offset from the heap itself or from another structure. So we can sort of dive down by structures, and we know almost to the pinpoint where the chunk is going to be in the block. So we can just go, you know, we know that at offset this is the size, at offset this is the previous size. At this offset should be the cookie, and if these values don't match to what they should be, then there's problems, right? So we know that we're in like bin size 2 or 3 or 4, so we know that the size should be 2, 3 or 4, whatever it is, right? And so we can sort of validate and cross-reference the size and see if it's overwritten and things like that. And we know that the F-link should be the next chunk in the bin, and we know what the next chunk is because we know the offsets on the sizes of the chunks, right? So these can be determined at runtime and checked and validated on the fly. So, you know, for example, you know, it's list hint in Windows 7, which is essentially a list hint like 7F or 7FF, which is essentially the same as free list 0 to some degree in XP. Essentially stores chunks of a larger size for that particular block's index. You know, and we can validate that. We can decode the header at runtime, all at runtime, and check to see if that particular size is bigger than you know, those than 7FF or not. You know, if it's bigger, like you know, we can check to see, okay, is F-link and B-link the same value? Because in list hints, right, in Windows 7, they're never going to be, because there's no pointer going back to the same entry itself in Windows 7. So they shouldn't be ever the same values. Essentially, like again, the size is checked again. You know, the decoded size is checked against the bin size plus the base index. And then, you know, if it's smaller or if it's the same value, then you know, it's fine. It's totally fine. It's a good chunk. So you know, same with list hint N, similar kind of situation. You know, full validation on the actual size itself. Again, checking to see if those values are the same, and if they are, there's going to be an overwrite, and else it's going to be it's fine. The chunk is fine. So, and then back onto XP and the older platforms, you can see that it just does a straight up unlinked check. So, and if that's overwritten, then yeah, it's a chunk that's overwritten. Yeah. So, I mean, the reason why we graph this kind of thing is it's just because it's a lot easier to see, right? Like, you know, if you look in the debugger, you know, you see like, you know, all these hex values and offsets and things, and it gets confusing, and you know, it's hard to sort of visualize where an override's occurred or how the actual heap is structured. You might want to have a situation where you might want to pad out the heap before you do an attack against it. You know, you might want to defrag the heap and send malicious packets to a process or something like that, and be able to determine the layout pre an attack. So you know, we want to be able to visualize that and that structure first. So it's really important to sort of see what the structure looks like, even if just from a learning perspective. If trying to understand how it's laid out, then this is more important, right? Yeah. So you know, I've tried to make it as possible, like easy to use as possible. Yeah, so like there's, you know, update functions or config functions, the ability that logs everything in the windows, which you can obviously save, you know, and the fact that it simulates, you know, for example, like right for conditions or something like that against particular pointers. So the whole tool is designed to have like individual functions that work together to help build up a proper exploit for the heap. So you know, even if you have to find like a function pointer to overwrite, then there's a function point. There's, you know, the ability to find those function pointers that can be overwritten, and that kind of thing. So you know, it's pretty easy to install, right? Like it's just a couple of dependencies, which is probably the reason why it's not going to be included into Immunity Debugger. But you know, you need GraphViz, PY parsing, and PY dot, obviously, and these are the same sort of visualization tools that other, you know, reverse engineering kits and stuff use. So it's quite effective. It's quite good. Yep. So I'll move on now into like basic usage and what you can do with it. Yeah. So if you want to know how like a command works or what it's supposed to be doing, then you can just, you know, run a help and then the command name or whatever. There's a short and long name for each command, so it's nice and easy. Yeah, so it will give you an example and that kind of thing, and you can see the basic usage, right? So one of the main things I found, especially with the older platforms and ways to attack it, is by using fixed hard-coded function pointers, right? And so we needed the ability to be able to dump certain structures and things like that, like the TEB or the PEB or these kind of data structures that have hard-coded function pointers and they're called pretty regularly. So, you know, having the ability, we can just dump the current process environment block and sort of work out with the function pointer straight off the bat, that we can use for an exploitation primitive. So at the moment, the dumping of the TEB structure isn't included, but, you know, I can do it over time. It's just an old attack, so it's not really needed today's age at the moment. So yeah, but it can still dump the different TEBs, and you can manually look at the structure from that point of view anyway, from that point. So dumping a heap struct is obviously also pretty important. Like you might have an ability to override an actual heap structure itself. So, you know, like you might want to attack a function pointer down the bottom of the heap or something like that. So I guess that's the best. Yeah. So at runtime also another thing too. It will work out what platform it is pretty simply. You know, by checking the OS. And working out, you know, if it's XP, then it will dump the heap structure like this. If it's, you know, Windows 7 or whatever, or Vista, then it will dump the heap structure like this. So it will never give you the wrong kind of output like that. Yeah, so another one that I found was pretty important, especially in learning how the bit flip attack worked, was having the ability to analyze the bitmap. So not only can you like have a look at to see what chunks are available, like what bins are available for a chunk to allocate from, sorry. It also, you know, you can also modify those bits on the fly, right? So if you want to say, I just want to simulate the fact that I can flip a bit in this particular bin and try to, you know, cause an allocation from it and see what will happen, right? So you can go ahead and do that. You can just modify by specifying -P and then, you know, the bin size, and it will flip the bit for you. And then, yeah, so it's nice and simple. And then you can flip it back if you need to, what have you. Yeah. So obviously, like I said before, like one of the main points of you know, overriding certain, one of the things you need to trigger, especially in older platforms, is to overwrite function pointers, right? So I found it really important to look for and find function pointers in a process, like whether it be application specific or OS specific function pointers, you know, and on the fly patch them with a value, and then, you know, and then let the application keep running and trying to hope that we get, you know, fingers crossed that it calls one of those function pointers. If it does, or like we send something to the application, or we trigger the application to execute that function pointer, then we know we're on a win, right? So if I send packet A, and then I send packet B, and then it triggers the function pointer, and then I know that, okay, by sending this packet, I can trigger this particular function pointer, and then I can, you know, just disassemble and reverse that section and find out what's really going on, right? And so you can use that function pointer to overwrite. so it doesn't just obviously dump the IAT, right? So it will dump like other application-specific ones too. So it's there's actually two routines. There's find writable pointers and there's find writable pointers and dump function pointers. So they're virtually the same. Find writable pointers will just guarantee that they're actually writable and that you can modify it, and it will actually find opcode sequences of like, move value, fixed size value into register, then call that value. So it won't just, try and find the call, whatever, like straight up hard-coded value. So that's a pretty good advantage. For example, like, in NTDLL, you will find a whole bunch of fixed hard-coded function pointers, and you can, try and you can overwrite all of them at runtime and just see which ones get called, and then abuse that one where needed. So, so we'll go ahead and have a look at like chunk analysis, right? Like, we'll start with just the simple look aside. It's got some extra advantages, like you can see more of the heap header of the heap entry header, the chunk header. Like the sizes, the cookie value, and the expected sizes and that kind of stuff. And what the F-link is at runtime and stuff like that. So, if it's the last entry, it's going to be null and that kind of thing, because it doesn't point back to itself. It's not a Sentinel node as such. So I tried to make the layout as structurally easy to follow, so you can see, all right, this chunk's in this bin, this chunk's in this bin, and keep going down, right? And as soon as like the F-link is overwritten or any part of the header is overwritten, it will detect that and throw you out, an overwritten value is detected and that kind of thing. So another thing too I included was the ability to dump like the general look aside structs, which is like just to have a look at the values and see if the actual entry itself is overwritten instead of just a chunk. Not that I know of any primitive that can be used for that, but you might discover a primitive that you can use to use as an exploitation primitive. It's very much the same as DT general look aside in like, for example, in WinDebug or anything like that. And it's displays the S-list header struct as well. So in terms of the graphing, this is essentially like the idea of what I've done. It's just pretty simple. It's just got like, the bin entries and then the chunks inside it. And it will, that way you can visually see, okay, this bin's got, 5 chunks, this bin's got, 200, whatever. Like, obviously, the more complex the application, the more this is going to be a massive graph. And let me tell you, like, just trying to dump into Explorer will take like, a couple of minutes, so at least 5 minutes or so. So, and it will just be off the scale. And so one of the reasons that, like, obviously this happens, obviously, because it's, it's using a lot of data in the process, but what I've done is I've separated the ability to dump individual bin sizes, so you can specify -s and then, a particular size, and it will just dump that bin size. Because quite often in a heap exploit, you might be targeting a specific size bin and not needing to worry about all the other bin sizes, so you don't have to wait extra time and all this sort of stuff. You just want to focus in on exploiting that particular bin. So so this is like essentially like if you have on the looker side like an overwrite, right? It will say, all right, it's overwritten with this value, the F-link, the size is this value. Obviously it's not the expected size. Obviously the F-link is totally overwritten, and it's automatically created a fake F-link there, right? It's taken 8 bytes back from the F-link that's overwritten, the 4.1. It's there. Header. And so straight away that you can specify a fake chunk, and you can use a pointer to something that you can essentially fill with malicious data. So that's what it looks like graphed. So you've got, bang, straight away it'll show you this is overwritten, and you could possibly do a chunk on the looker side overwrite, and you can exploit the process like that. So nice and simple, not too complex. So yeah. And so, for like free lists, there's very similar kind of things. for free list 0 and free list n. But there's, for free list 0, for example, in this one, there's only one chunk in there, and free list, in 2 has got a couple of different chunks there. It kind of looks kind of complicated in this here, which is obviously the reason why I've done the graphing, to make it a bit easier for everyone's eyes. Yeah, so, as an example, this, with verbose mode as well, like with the free list, you can show like, okay, here's the entries that don't actually have chunks in it. So again, you might not want to have a look at entries that don't have any chunks in it. So, you can just run it like without the verbose mode, and it will just show you entries that have the chunks in it. You don't have to waste time filtering through different entries and that kind of thing. So, yeah, so again, free list graphing is kind of similar. Obviously, the lists are pointing to each other and that kind of thing, so it's looking, the graph is a little bit different in terms of its structure. And while this is a fairly primitive kind of graph, it's fairly small, obviously they get really, really big, right? So, yeah. And this is kind of what a chunk looks like when it's overwritten. In the free list, it's got like, the F link is overwritten, the B link is overwritten, you could potentially do it, an unlink or attack or something like that, depending on what platform you're on. You might be able to do a free list insertion or something like that from other people's techniques. So, yeah. So again, like that's what it looks like in, when it's dumping the overwritten chunk. Straight away it tells you, you can see the values that it's overwritten with, and nice and visualized for you. So you can go, all right, 3 chunks before the overwrite has occurred, I can, go ahead and try and allocate those chunks or whatever. I can somehow manipulate that bin structure somehow to be able to get code execution, right, to leverage it for code execution. So now we'll move on to, the LFH or Windows 7. This was a little bit tricky to do, and I haven't quite finished the validation routine on the user blocks at the moment. So at the moment, the only thing it's really validating is the next offset. So like there's the heap header, which is 8 bytes, and then the next 2 values after that is next offset, right? So the only thing I validate at the moment is just the next offset. There's reasons for it, but I won't go into it. But for now, that's probably the best way. Yeah, so basically at runtime, if the next offset will automatically point to a chunk that's outside the user blocks bin, then it will go, nah, it's a probably overwrite, right? So, or if it's the last chunk and it's FF, then it's fine. It checks for that too. So obviously that will point outside the bin, so that's fine. It will first check to see if it's the last chunk, and if it's FF, then we're all good. If it's not the last chunk, and if it's pointing to a chunk outside the bin, then yeah, we've got problems, right? So it dumps the structure for you on the fly, so you can see like this. It's from this point is where the user blocks is, and these are the values so far that it's found. So if one of those are corrupted, then you've overwritten a structure above the user blocks. That you might be able to also leverage for an attack. And it automatically determines what the next chunk is going to be allocated from. It's small, I know, but yeah, the slide didn't come up too well. So yeah, so it also does the user blocks cache. You can see what chunks and what user blocks are actually cached in memory. And where it might allocate from or free from in the future. And it's also got the buckets, the LFH buckets, so counting the number of chunks that have been allocated before it triggers the LFH. So yeah, so that's quite useful. So again, the graphing is a little bit different. So it's got, it highlights if it's a busy chunk or if it's a free chunk, and and that way if you can allocate from there, or you can't allocate, or you have to free before you can do any more allocations. Yeah. So if there's an overwrite, it will like I said, it will just validate the next offset in that for that chunk, and you know, it will say, you know, it's pointing to an arbitrary location, and it will show you the arbitrary location straight away. So if you've got like a next offset overwrite, you can go straight away and go, oh, maybe do I control that value? Okay, if I do, you know, can I point it to an area of memory where an object is that I can overwrite and trigger a function pointer call, right? You know, you might want to use the free entry offset overwrite attack, for example. So, you know, straight away you can go, all right, and then go check that area of memory and go, you know, is there any objects that can be overwritten? So what I'll do, one of the extensions that I'm going to add to this is the fact that if there is an overwrite, it will automatically, on the fly, it will check to see in that area of new memory that it's pointing to for the next allocation, is there objects that can be overwritten? Is there function pointers that are stored in that location for the whole size of that particular bin, right? And so if there is, it'll spit out, okay, function pointer found here, function pointer found here, potential code execution, you know, that can be triggered. So yeah, just highlighting that there, so you can see. Again, you know, when graphing, it'll graph it all the separate graphs for the bin sizes, so it's like nice and easy to sort of follow. And if there's an overwrite, it will actually throw out using the name of the file as overwritten, and it will show you that the next offset is overwritten for that chunk. Just by how it works, the next chunks after that will always be busy. I can't quite remember the reason why that is. I know it's written down somewhere in my notes, but anyway, there's a reason for that. So there's also the ability to check out the list hints, right? For the back-end allocator of Windows 7. So you can go, all right, well, how many allocations do we need before we can trigger the LFH? So, you know, you might want to use that as you might need to do that to work to cause allocations for a primitive to trigger the LFH, right, for example, which is nice and handy, nice and simple and handy to use. So again, it will give you all the information, like the current blocks index was set to 0 on this particular example, but it might be 7F for the second blocks index. You know, it shows you the current block size. Okay, again, it's 80. You know, that kind of information. So it gives you the extended lookup address and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, very, very useful. So obviously, if there's an F link in the bin, then you know that the LFH is activated, right? Yeah. So when having a look at the free list under Windows 7, it will show you the list hints that have chunks in it. Essentially, list hints is the same as free lists, to some degree. Just don't want to confuse it too much, but just think of it like the old XP heap in some ways. It's not too many changes to it. And you can see there's actually 2 blocks indexes activated. So the first one, the second one down here as well. So in this particular case, it's using 2. And you've got chunks in different bin sizes there, and it's nice and easy to see. And you can see on the far right-hand side, yeah, it's like, for example, the chunks are validated straight away. So the next offset's always checked every time you dump it. So you can go, yep, bang, it's the expected value that it should be, etc., etc. Again, graphing of the free list kind of looks like this, kind of topsy-turvy. I can probably improve this a little bit at the moment. But yeah, essentially it's showing you where chunks are linked and to which entries, and you can dump that verbosely as well. So yeah, so when having a look at if chunks are overwritten in the back-end allocator of Windows 7 of Vista Heap, then you can see, like, for example, it just tells you that it's overwritten. If you run the exploit command, there's actually a command in the Heaper tool that you can just run exploit against all the heaps and work out if there's a chunk that's overwritten in any of the heaps, and it will automatically give you suggestions on the best type of attack possibly for that particular overwrite. With this, it's not going to give you any output because there's simply, I don't know of any, maybe you guys know, but of an attack that you can do against the the back-end allocator of Windows 7, right? So there's nothing really known that can be used to, in terms of metadata attacks, that is, that can be used to exploit it. So, yeah, so it will still tell you that a chunk is overwritten, the values that they are, and that you still might be able to find you discover a whole new metadata attack just by sitting there and figuring out one particular overwrite in the back end of you know, of a Windows 7 process. So now we're going to like hooking the heap manager, right? So so basically there's both hard and soft hooking in, like, you know, it's already been done in the debugger, but it's nice and simple, and it's integrated into the tool as well. So if you want to do like hard hooking, for example, obviously it's the most effective. It's patching the assembly, so it's a lot faster. You don't have to wait for software interrupts, software breakpoints. You know, it just does a code cave and jumps off to another location and saves that value and then jumps back again. So this can be extended for other heap functions, for other functions too. So if you want to do like realloc or something like that, or if you want to do like virtual alloc or something like that, if you want to like analyze a heap spray, for example, the code is very simple enough for you to extend it, or I'll probably extend it in the future anyway. So, but you know, patches are welcome, right? So yeah, it's nice and handy way to discover primitives quickly and efficiently. So you can work out, all right, I can, you know, make this many allocations or this many frees before I can trigger the overwrite for some particular reason. So. The soft hooking, well, it's really only for testing, right? Like it's not practical. It's very slow, obviously. So it's just in there just for safe measure, right? Just in case one doesn't work, you can try the other or whatever. Like it's just in there. But I'll probably be taking it out of the tool in no time. So again, you can like patch the PEB, right? So if you like, you've got debug mode set on the process, or for whatever reason you've accidentally compiled your test program, like I have, in debug mode, then you can just patch the PEB so it won't try and, you know, it won't stuff up the heap memory at all, which is pretty helpful. Again, you can like update the tool, so like straight away if I've done a commit to Git and like it's improved this or improved that, then you can just run just -u or u, sorry, and just update the latest version, nice and easy. Yeah, so there's also configuring the working directory, and this will be extended obviously in the future too. So when you configure like logs or that kind of thing, or output, there'll be more configuration options, but this has just got one working directory configuration option there. Make it a bit easier. So like we'll go on to looking at like detecting exploitable conditions, you know, and using the exploit command. You know, it was really difficult doing this, right? Like trying to go, all right, well this is overwritten at this location, this is this value, you know, maybe you can potentially do this attack. It's so hard to work out, you know, maybe you can do this type of metadata attack or this type of metadata attack, because it assumes so much knowledge. It assumes like that you can, you know, you can lay out the heap the way you want to. It assumes that you can control the content of the overwritten chunk. It assumes just so much. So this is it still produces a fair few false positives. So it still requires a fair bit of analysis from the exploit writer's point of view. But having said that, it helps and speeds up the process. It pinpoints you a little bit closer to that. So yeah, you know, and sometimes you might overwrite multiple chunks, right? And it might only detect, for example, you know, the second chunk that's overwritten, because the first chunk you haven't controlled all the contents of the chunk that's using to overwrite. So you might not overwrite the header or anything like that. So there's limitations to it, right? Anyway, you can scan all the heaps at runtime, like just straight away, by specifying all, and you can just check the front-end allocator, for example, right? And you can go, all right, is this chunk where is there any chunks overwritten? And straight away, you know, you can go, all right, well, there's a chunk overwritten in the first heap, and okay, I know that the first heap is the process heap, so you know, maybe I can determine its heap state, right? And again, it will tell you, you know, it's overwritten, you know, and it will give you a suggestion. For example, it's, you know, the free entry offset overwrite. You need 2 more allocations to overwrite the free entry offset, and then this is where it will point. This is where I'll be pointing to. So maybe go find some function pointers in that area of memory, right? So yeah, it'll just do that pretty neatly. Again, no technique is suggested for the back end, but it will still check to see if there's an overwritten chunk in the back end. I know it's really small. I'm sorry, guys. It's pretty. I don't know. The demo should be a bit bigger anyway. And so, you know, look aside. It will also give you suggestions for that. It will show you that, you know, you can try this this attack, and then try to run this command to find writable pointers that you can overwrite and things like that. So it tries to give you a step-by-step process of exploitation and make it a bit simpler for the exploit developer, because like heap knowledge is pretty hard to come by, so makes it easier for everyone. Allocate this number of chunks, using this size, and hopefully you can trigger a function pointer call, right, with your code. Also with the bit flip attack, it's also covering that, so it will tell you that if you've overwritten a chunk in bin size 41 in the backend allocator, then you can probably do a bit flip attack. And it will say, if you can control the size, then you might be able to flip the bit in the mask, and cause allocation from that will essentially allocate the entry itself, and then you can use it to overwrite part of the heap structure, which I first showed you in the first couple of slides. And then using that, you can overwrite a function pointer in the heap itself. So it will give you all suggestions. It will show you which function pointer that you can try and overwrite and things like that. So again, it just helps guide the exploit developer into some sort of path, right? So it tells you all the important sizes and information, right? Now we'll go on to like a little bit of a demo for analyzing a bug. I don't have my VM up anymore. Sorry, one sec, I just launched the... Okay. All right. Cool. How's that? Oh, that comes up all right, actually. Let's see if we can do full screen. Okay, cool. All right, so what I'll do... just start a little web server. So I'll just start a mini debugger and attach it to IE, because I'll use the demo, IE demo for this. What do we got? So, right. Okay, all right. The text is big for now. Okay. So I'll just have a quick look. All right. So we go to the trigger. Bang. We've got a crash, right? Standard. Sometimes you don't always get a crash from a heap overflow, obviously, because it actually has to use the chunk, right, like that you've overwritten, or use the memory that you've attacked or smashed. So, but in this case, it does, because I throw enough data at it just to smash everything, and hopefully something will trigger an access violation, right? So let's have a look here. So I'll make this a bit bigger, and you can have a bit of a look. Font. Let's see. There we go. Okay, so have a quick look. Dump the heaps. All right. Right. So we've got a list of heaps there. So fair enough. So we'll just run the exploit command and just sort of see which chunks are overwritten against all the heaps. Oh no, it's going to throw me errors. That's ugly, isn't it? Hang on. It works, I swear. Backhand. No, okay. Nah, I don't. That's okay. We run it again. It should. It basically relies on a patch to libheap in the Muni debugger, which I patched, but I don't know, for some reason it's still throwing stuff at me. So give me a sec. Right. Right, that's a bit better. Okay. So it's throwing a whole bunch of stuff at me. It's going, all right, well, there's 5 vulnerable chunks. It's because it's smashed multiple chunks in a bin and it's kept overriding in different bins, you know. So you can see that the value is, you know, the next offset's 4114. Does sound kind of dodged, right? So if we just have a quick look though, it's not going to let me show the desktop, is it? No, it's not. One sec. So okay, so if you have a look at this value here, this is the controlled value that we're using for the heap overflow, right? So if I were to go like this, paste it into here, and then I times it by 100, right? And then I convert it to hex. So essentially, we're filling the chunk that we're overriding with like 41, 41, 14. So if we go back to here, we can see sort of values that are similar to that already, right? So if we were to copy to clipboard just the address and have a little bit of a look, just follow that dump, you can see 41, 40, 14, and that kind of thing. So it will only detect to see if the actual next offset's overwritten, right? So you can see, yeah, so if we scroll up for a bit, you can see there, right, the chunk header is here. The next offset's not overwritten, right, so it doesn't detect that chunk as being overwritten. So it's just one limitation in the user blocks that I've got at the moment, so just to point that out, right, the tool's not perfect, it's still in development mode. So, but, I have here a finished version. So I'll just, because everyone likes shells, right? So I'll show a finished version. So after doing some analysis and having a look at what's overwritten and that kind of thing, you can actually turn the heap overflow in the browser to an info leak. You can use it to bypass certain protections and control memory in the right way. So because we're in a browser and we've got a scripting environment, we have the ability to modify the heap state on the fly. Then we can use it to manipulate the heap just in the right way to be able to trigger an info leak and then exploit, you know, override a VF table in an object and that kind of thing. So, you know, first of all, it defrags the heap. You know, it then goes ahead and builds a structure with an object. So this code obviously won't be available, but you know you can get it from like Canvas if you buy Canvas, right? So so yeah, and then it fills up memory with a whole bunch of objects. In this particular case, it needs it, but in IE9, I didn't need this many you know objects. It was a lot easier with just 1 or 2 objects, button objects. Sorry, fixed table objects there. You know, and then it will go to trigger this function leak VF table. And then it will check the array up here, the allocated chunks array, for an overwrite, which we've triggered just here for the leak. And then if it has found a chunk, then it will use it to offset the base of MS-HTML, and then it will dynamically build a ROP chain in heap memory, in memory, sorry, and then it will we overwrite the VF table of the button object with a controlled value, and then use that to call into our heap spray and hopefully pop a shell, right? So let's have a look. Right, so just to let you know, there's no listening process on port 4444. So what we'll do, so we'll just have a quick look. So it's nice and simple. I've just done a nice simple layout. So for example, we start by leaking the VF table, and it gives us this address. It's very reliable, and that's the address of the VF table of the button object. We use that value to dynamically build a ROP chain and spray it into memory, and then we simply just you know trigger the override again to overwrite the button object and call the VF table, a function from the VF table, and get code execution. So yeah, and there we go. We have a shell, right? Because we don't do calcs, we do shells. Okay. Yeah, so that's that demo. All right, so back to the slides. So yeah, like some of the limitations, right, is you know, it won't be able to analyze LFH on XP, right? So for example, a lot of core processors on XP will use LFH, like IE will use LFH. You know, Windows Media Player, for example, uses the LFH on XP. So we can't analyze that, but you know, again, you can do a lot of that kind of manually anyway. And there's nothing really at the moment for Windows 8 Heap. I'm probably not going to include that. I don't know, I'm still iffy about it, I'm not sure yet. Just because there's only literally 1 or 2 exploitation techniques, metadata attacks that could be done. But having said that, I might include it because I might focus a lot more on application data attacks anyway. So I might end up just including it and we can work with that. But what I also want to focus in on in the future is including support for other heap implementations on top of the Windows system heap itself. So you know, and then obviously it needs a decent search function and a few other things in the tool. Yeah, so for example, JMLlock, I want to do an implementation of that and be able to analyze JML heap states and stuff like that. Yeah, and again, so automatically at runtime with the exploit command, I want to do stuff like it will dump all the function pointers it finds close to the chunk that's overwritten. So maybe you can use that and leverage that somehow. If you can just override with a little bit more data, you might be able to get an application type of attack and you know, improve the heuristics. So yeah, I mean, it's really complex, right? Like heap analysis, and especially dynamic heap analysis, is extremely complex. And I can, you know, you can take different approaches. You can save heap states and restore them and things like that. And you can, there's lots of different ways. But I found this to be somewhat most effective in terms of dynamic analysis of the heap in Windows anyway. It might be able to be solved by another way, like using some sort of solver or engine like that. So, but we'll see how we go in the future in terms of converting that. And yeah, so thanks to the people that know, those that know heap stuff, and the people that have helped me learn along the way. You know who you are, right? So thanks very much. And yeah, so if you want to submit like patches or bugs in my code or whatever, that's fine. Just email me or send them to me somehow, and I'll fix up stuff in the code, no problem. So yeah, thanks a lot. Any questions?